That should be good for everybody.
Yes, yes, good.
So, again, pre-registering for enhanced credibility and transparency into the research process. To register a study is to make a declaration and put that into a public online registry. Uh, some communities, especially in the social sciences, emphasize the importance of doing that before the study is conducted by adding the prefix pre to, again, to emphasize the timing in which that takes place. And not only a simple declaration and description of the study, but oftentimes additional materials and details are added to those registrations. So detailed protocols, detailed pre-analysis plans uh, can and often should be added to those study declarations. And those have additional benefits that I'll be getting into about making clearer distinctions between planned analyses and unplanned discoveries. So study registration uh, has been around, it's been advocated for several decades, but um, in its current form, it's mostly been around since around the year 2000. And the main problem that the some of the earliest clinical registries were focused on was uh, trying to connect uh, uh, patients with ongoing clinical trials and the most advanced research. And they were um, funded because constituents would reach out uh, to representatives or to reach out to the National Institutes for Health. They they'd say we know you're funding these relevant studies that we could potentially benefit from, but there's no way to determine where those are taking place or who's working on them. And so the original purpose of creating these centralized clinical registries was to open the file drawer and to sort of connect uh, patients with the ongoing, most advanced research. But in addition to helping that discovery problem, there are a number of other benefits that were quickly, came into focus. Um, so even in basic research before more applied research, it can have a role in increasing transparency and again distinguishing um, planned specific hypothesis testing research from unplanned discoveries that really advance the field forward. So to give you an overview of what those distinctions are and how they're both useful, one analogy that's often used is the so-called garden of forking paths. And the analogy here is that a very basic, straightforward research question, you know, you have a relationship that you think might be relevant between two variables, and you start to analyze that very specific sounding research question. But in reality, that very specific question has uh, dozens or in reality hundreds of um, other similar analyses and decisions that could have been made along that analysis pipeline. So, what specific statistical model was chosen? How do you control for, the age or the demographic background? How do you precisely frame and measure the outcomes that you're interested in? Each one of those simple questions doubles or triples the number of possible specific analyses that you have. And by chance alone, a certain subset of those might come back statistically significant. And so the number of possible analyses quickly grows, and um, all of a sudden we're sort of wandering through this garden of forking paths of alternative credible analyses. And um, the, the problem comes when we report those statistical tests as if they had been pre-planned and specified in advance, when we kind of forget throughout that process what the original specified test was at the beginning of that journey. So both of those types of modes of research, one specific test versus looking through all the different possible analyses, are equally relevant, and are complementary to how research takes place. But there's a clear distinction between the relative benefits of both. So when we're in that mode of exploration, as a real data-driven, follow the clues in an emerging data set, you are oriented towards discovery. You really don't want to miss a potential relationship or a potential correlation in the data set. These are unknown relationships, and so you're pushing knowledge into new and unexplored areas. And you're generating new models or new potential theories to explain the data that you're looking through. That's really the core of research is really right there. Um, but a lot of our basic statistical tools weren't built or don't assume that that process is taking place in the much more rigid framing of confirmation and hypothesis testing. It's important to have a pre-specified hypothesis before the data are opened up and looked at. And we really do want to have high standards for rigorous evaluation, decrease the type 1 error rate to to not make a claim that there's something interesting going on here, unless there's a relatively high certainty that is actually true. And the outcomes of those types of investigations have more direct impact on decision making. As a research consumer, looking at the results of a study, the process of looking at a pre-registered study can give you more context about the entire story that is being told. So where did this result come from? Were these analyses planned in advance, or were they the result of looking for unexpected relationships? Um, Essentially, can we know where this result is coming from? But as the producer of research, the process of prediction can also be quite helpful. It can potentially help improve the process of planning and really generating a specific testable hypothesis ahead of time. It can enhance feedback. The more specific you make it, the more opportunity there is for colleagues or supervisors or reviewers to provide um, more specific advice. And it increases clarity on exactly what is being critiqued or evaluated. It increases the credibility of claims, especially when you're trying to make that strong confirmatory statement. Sort of demonstrates that the claim was made ahead of time, and it can really help you stick to that original plan. And when it comes time to then open up the data set and start looking through it, there's no incentive to kind of uh, present that type of work, using frequent statistics or using or trying to massage the data in any way. You're simply looking for exceptions or areas that are worth following up on. We provide, there are many platforms for submitting a registration. There are many registries. Each, of course, country has their own clinical registry where research that involves recruitment of patients, uh, those are usually required by law to be registered in the appropriate area. For basic research that doesn't involve recruiting patients into into studies. There are a number of preclinical and basic research registries. The OSF, the one that we build and maintain, I'll show some examples of how to create that here. So the Open Science Framework is the open source online tool and platform that we provide. And going to the registry brings you to this page where you can uh, start a new pre-registration. We have a number of templates and recommended forms or um, templates to fill out that'll help you uh, fully pre-specify a detailed study registration. The default is the one I'll show. It's just the OSF pre-registration. It's a comprehensive pre-registration that contains both the articulation, the details of what's included in the study details, but also has fields for how for the design and the protocol and the analysis plan. So all of the potential benefits of pre-registration are included in that default template. But we have about a dozen others that are relevant for systematic reviews, especially systematic reviews outside of the health sciences. Um, we have several that are relevant to social psychology. We have some that are relevant for um, conducting research on existing data sets, so, a data set that's already been collected and posted in a data repository somewhere. We have a template that helps you conduct research on in those examples. But again, I'll just be mentioning our default one here. So it has about 30 questions in 7 different pages on the form, and it walks you through all the important considerations to include as you're fleshing out the details of your study. Uh, One important area that gets a lot of questions and has a lot of details behind it is the timing of the registration. So again, pre emphasizes before the study takes place. In the world of clinical medicine, that means before the first patient is enrolled in the study. But that isn't true, of course, if you're not recruiting patients. Uh, the the mark in the sand where we would say that it's really not a pre-registration is that last field right there, following analysis of the data. So a warning pops up, and it'll show you that that's a little bit, um, it can't be called a pre-registration at that point. Um, and if you are starting this and you're collecting your own data and you haven't looked at it, you haven't started that process yet, that's the first line um, on that set of questions. But again, between those 2 points, there's a lot of nuance, and we can help you sort of figure out what's the uh, right response given the circumstances of your study. At the end of the process, after you fully pre-specify the analyses and the data collection process and what variables are going to be collected, you're given this uh, a citable read-only version of the project. And actually, when I say read-only, that has a qualifier, which I'll get to in a moment. There are ways to update and edit these, but those leave sort of breadcrumbs. They leave a note about what was changed and when and why. Uh, but when you have these citable pre-registrations, those are available on the registry. They can either be made public immediately or they can be sent into an embargo for a maximum of 4 years. And that again, allows the work to continue for a while before, before it being made public. And that's an important feature because we get a lot of questions or concerns about competitors potentially scooping the ongoing work that you've been working on. But once you've made the effort and taken the time to create these detailed plans, often data collection is ready to go right after this. It sort of gives you a leg up, and anybody sort of combing the registry looking to scoop others' work would have their work cut out for them to get up to speed to where you are by the time you've taken the effort to lay out all of these plans. Once the work is conducted, then it's, of course, obviously time to start writing up the results of the work. And there are a couple of important reminders that we encourage you to look out for, or that we'll look out for if we're involved um, in the funding or the conduct of this work. So make sure to any preprint or any article that's being generated from this to cite the pre-registration and to state that it was pre-registered. You report the results of all the tests that were included in that pre-registration. So if you said you were going to do 10 analyses, make sure to report on all 10 of those or however many they were. Any analyses that show up in the paper that weren't included in the pre-registration, state that these were unregistered tests. And almost 100% of the time, there will be changes from what was planned ahead of time to what ended up taking place. And those need to be disclosed. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can put that in the manuscript itself, or in a minute, I'll show you sort of how to do that on the registry, how to update the plan and put in a justification for what changed and why. And there's two different types of changes. One is very easy to justify just before the study, before data collection is fully underway. Um, you might do a little bit of additional pilot testing or feasibility work, and you simply have to change the protocol in some way. Another type of change is as you're collecting data, you kind of see which way the wind is blowing, or you see certain preliminary results and you make changes at that time. That's potentially problematic if you're specifically changing the collection process to get the result that you want to look for. So again, warnings sort of pop up there to remind the researcher that that's potentially problematic. But we do enable it and provide transparency and a box for individuals to justify, why that change was made and when it was made. So yeah, getting right to that point of you could decide at any point to change the protocol because there was some error. Um, Additional analyses seem warranted. You could learn additional, data analysis potentials as you're just going through this process, or any other update to the design. These could be well justified reasons for making changes to the pre-registration. And our goal is to make sure that there's a clear way to disclose why and when that happened. So when you're making those changes, you simply go through your list of registrations, update them, update the field that you are interested in making a change to. Um, and and that will show up on that summary page that the change was made at a certain time, and you can, as a reader, see the original version, see the updated version, and see an explanation of why that change was made. There's an additional publishing format that's closely related to pre-registration, but it has several additional uh, uh, features included in it. Essentially, if you create the pre-registered study and submit it to a journal, again, still before the study is conducted, it can become part of what we call registered reports. So with the registered report, there's a two-stage peer review process. That first stage of peer review, again, occurs at the time that you've created the proposed study, but haven't, again, started it. So that stage one, that first stage of peer review, will typically look like a normal manuscript, including the introduction, proposed methods and analyses, and any sort of pilot data, but it won't include, of course, any results or discussion. Once that's submitted to the journal, the reviewers will evaluate are these hypotheses important and they're sort of justified and well-founded? Are the proposed methods feasible and detailed? Is there a sufficiently high power to detect the effect size of interest that the authors think that they are interested in seeing? And the last thing that reviewers and the editor will look for, I think, is the most important. Is there some way to demonstrate that the authors are conducting the study correctly? Is there some sort of positive control that shows that the experimental manipulation worked, that they're being done in a very competent and correct manner? And the reason that that's important, it's important to do that before you see the results, um, because one of the big challenges with getting null results published is that once you see those null results from a study, in hindsight, it can become very difficult to judge if that was a, a study worth doing, or if it was not, if it was uh, superfluous, or in hindsight, we might think, well, of course, that came out as a null result. There was no way that we would expect that to be true anyway. Or, of course, it came back as a null result. They didn't know what they were doing. They did it wrong. They weren't experienced enough to use that technique. And making those distinctions, again, once you see the results, are very difficult because a lot of biases can creep in. And so reviewers and editors thinking about the potential for getting a null result are incentivized at this early stage to think, how would I expect somebody to demonstrate that they're doing the methods correctly? What would I expect to see, not looking at the main result, but looking at some sort of demonstration that they're conducting the study appropriately? If the answer to all these questions is yes, if it's an interesting and well-powered and there's good quality controls put in place, then the study can be given in-principle acceptance, which is a promise to publish the results regardless of the main outcome of the study. The study's conducted, it's written up, analyzed, and that stage two is typically much quicker. Uh, they include the new results, the new discussion, and typically there'll be data and materials deposition in a repository at that stage. Just like regular pre-registrations I talked about before, authors are expected to report all of those um, tests that were agreed upon at the time. They are almost always allowed and encouraged to add additional analyses that were not included in that registered design, uh, but those need to be disclosed as such. And very importantly, the reviewers are only looking at whether or not the the positive controls succeeded and are the main conclusions justified. And they're really not looking for things like whether or not the results are significant or impactful or things like that. They're only supposed to be evaluating these types of questions at the second stage of peer review. We have a pretty comprehensive set of FAQs and resources for authors and for editors and for peer reviewers on the website, cos.io/RR for registered reports. We have over 300, about 350 or so journals use the format. Um, and there's a couple of different communities that are actively engaged in this. And it's been around for about 15 years now in its sort of current form, but it's been around for methodology such as systematic reviews for longer than that. Um, Quickly, I'm just going to mention these, but my apologies if I go through these a little quickly. They've been around for long enough that some meta science, some evaluations have occurred on the impact that registered reports are having. And this was one study a few years ago that compared the first results of 71 registered reports to 152 comparable studies. And they found a 96% rate of positive results in those standard traditional publications and about 44% of positive results in that group of registered reports. And sort of that gap first sort of demonstrates the strong bias towards statistically significant findings that we see through many different communities in the traditional literature, and the um, slightly more ideal distribution of significant and non-significant results when we evaluate the questions ahead of time and we don't evaluate the questions only once the results are known. So in this case, Richard reports are starting to work as expected and as intended. One project that we conducted was to evaluate essentially what reviewers thought of register reports versus traditional studies. Uh, so we recruited 353 reviewers, and each of them evaluated two papers each. Um, we blinded them initially to the whether or not it was a register report. We tried to match them so that they were either from the same journal or from the same authors, the pairs that each reviewer looked at. And the reviewers evaluated three stages. So they first just look at the intro and um, methods, then the results and discussion, and then finally they were given the abstract. And they were asked a series of questions at each of these stages. So we asked them to evaluate how rigorous, how high quality, how important the research was, and even questions such as creativity or novelty, because a lot of feedback that we get is that this is going to make science not very creative and not very novel. And in no case were the registered reports rated as worse than the standard papers. So on the right side is our of these 19 questions, ones in which the registered reports were rated better than the standard papers. The farther to the right they are. And um, the closer to the center line it is, um, showing no noticeable difference between the two. And any of the questions that would have been on the uh, left of that dotted line would have been ones where the standard papers were evaluated as being substantially better than registered reports. In most of the questions of um, rigor and quality, the the methods were shown to be more rigorous in the registered reports. And in several of them, the confidence intervals overlapped, and there's no difference in overall quality or novelty or inspiring new research. So we think that there are several advantages to the registered report model. We see very detailed and repeatable and reusable methods. Um, we often see them with openly available data and materials for reuse and for better evaluation and for clearer distinction between those two modes of research that I talked about before. And we think that they enhance credibility because they address important issues such as hindsight or publication bias. So that is all I have for today. I'm happy to take lots of questions. The slides are available at that link. And for now, I will stop sharing my screen and I think I'll pop up the rest of the Zoom window here.